$83 a month. That is the legal rent in a town where leaving your front door unlocked is a strict safety law, and another community is built entirely out of recycled plastic bottles because traditional banks refuse to touch it. Not a marketing scam, not a ghost town foreclosure, a real, living reality. Right now, 10 Canadian towns are operating on rules so bizarre you will swear they are fake. The real estate industry doesn't want you to know these places exist because homes cost under $95,000, but by December 2026, these economic loopholes are closing forever. One town is split perfectly down an international border where kids cross a customs checkpoint just to go to elementary school. Another has a polar bear prison right next to the local grocery store. Most people will never see this data, and choosing wrong could cost you 10 years of retirement savings. Hit subscribe because choosing wrong here costs thousands, and you are not ready for number one. Let's break it down. Number 1. Vulcan, Alberta. Vulcan is the kind of town where local businesses in 1960s sci-fi cosplay exist on the exact same block. Located right in the middle of sunny southern Alberta, practically neighbors with Calgary, this place has a stable population of just under 2,000 residents. On the surface, it looks like a typical prairie farming community, but the reality is completely hijacked by a cosmic obsession. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with: a median home price hovering around 265,000 Canadian dollars. That is less than the cost of a parking spot in Toronto. An average rent sits at a beautiful 1,150 Canadian dollars. Your dollar goes insanely far here because the cost of living is 14% below the national average. Crime is practically non-existent, unless you count violating the Starfleet dress code. The job market is mostly agricultural, but here's the kicker. The town features a massive 31-foot replica Starship Enterprise that greets you the second you drive in. But here's what nobody tells you. The town had absolutely zero connection to Star Trek until the 1990s when someone realized they shared a name with Spock's home planet and decided to exploit it for tourism. If you aren't a massive sci-fi nerd, your daily errands will feel like an endless fever dream. As one Reddito put it, I went to get my prescription filled and a guy in full Klingon makeup tried to explain the town's local tax bylaws to me. I just wanted my allergy meds. So, what's the actual price of this affordability? You get cheap housing, but you also get a local economy built entirely on a 60-year-old television franchise. You'll save money on rent, but you'll spend your weekends wondering why your local bank looks like the bridge of a spaceship. Okay, can we talk about the local stores for a sec? Why does every single bakery, pharmacy, and auto repair shop look like a prop department exploded inside it? I swear, you can't even buy a loaf of bread without a cardboard cutout of Captain Kirk judging your carb intake. And don't even get me started on the winter tourism dip, where the streets go completely dead and it feels like an abandoned space station. Number 2. St. Louis du Ha, Quebec. St. Louis du Ha is the kind of town where punctuation laws and quiet dairy farming exist on the exact same block. Located deep in the rolling hills of southeastern Quebec, practically neighbors with the New Brunswick border, it holds a stable population of around 1,300 people. On the surface, it looks like a serene, deeply traditional French-Canadian village, but the reality is a complete logistical nightmare for your phone's autocorrect. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with: a median home price of just 195,000 Canadian dollars. That's essentially pocket change compared to Montreal. An average rent drops to a ridiculous 850 Canadian dollars. Translation: your dollar flies here since the cost of living is 22% below the national average. Crime rates are virtually zero, and the local job market is heavily tied to agriculture. Here's the kicker. It is officially verified by the Guinness Book of World Records as the only town name on Earth containing 2 exclamation points. But here's what nobody tells you. The ha isn't a joke. It's an archaic 17th century French word for an unexpected obstacle or dead end. If you move here, your biggest enemy isn't the winter, it's technology. As one Redditor brutally put it, trying to buy a couch online took 3 phone calls to tech support because every single checkout website kept telling me punctuation wasn't allowed in the city field. So, what's the real trade-off? You get beautiful, dirt-cheap land, but you also get a lifetime of administrative headaches. You'll save thousands on a mortgage, but you might spend your evenings screaming at a digital customs form that refuses to accept your address. Let's talk about the Wi-Fi and tech infrastructure for a sec. Why does every modern database treat this town like a malicious hacking attempt? I swear, trying to update your banking info here feels like trying to bypass a government firewall. And don't even get me started on the language barrier. If your French is rusty, the locals will look at you like you just landed from another planet. Subscribe, because the next time you're looking at a cheap $85,000 mortgage, you'll want to remember if the town requires an ICE road trucking permit just to get groceries. Don't buy a house that's secretly an extreme survival trap. Number 3. Dildo, Newfoundland. Dildo is the kind of town where historic 18th century maritime charm and incredibly suggestive adult humor exist on the exact same block. Perched right on the scenic edge of Trinity Bay, practically neighbors with St. John's, this coastal enclave boasts a population of about 1,200 residents. On the surface, it's a gorgeous, postcard-perfect Atlantic fishing village, but the reality has been completely upended by an accidental internet comedy campaign. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with: a median home price sitting at a comfortable 210,000 Canadian dollars. That's a fraction of what you'd pay for a cramped condo in Vancouver, and average rent hovers around 950 Canadian dollars. Your dollar stretches beautifully here because the cost of living is 18% lower than the national average. Crime context: pretty much zero, unless you count tourists behaving badly for the camera. The job market is mostly fishing and tourism, but here's the kicker. The name actually dates back to 1711, originally referring to a cylindrical wooden peg used on rowboats. But here's what nobody tells you. Ever since late-night host Jimmy Kimmel randomly discovered the town and ran for honorary mayor, quiet local life has vanished. The narrow coastal roads are now swarming with selfie-seeking crowds, and souvenir shops selling endless adult-themed puns dominate the historic harbor. As one local posted on Reddit, explaining to my corporate HR department where I was moving from required me to bring in a literal historical map to prove I wasn't playing a crude prank. So, what's the actual price of this coastal bargain? You get stunning ocean views for cheap, but you also get a lifetime of explaining your address with a straight face. You'll save thousands on housing, but you might spend your weekends dealing with massive traffic jams caused by tourists stealing the town's perimeter signs. Okay, can we talk about the parking situation for a sec? These winding, cliffside roads were built for 18th century fishermen, not a massive convoy of tour buses and rental cars. I swear, trying to grab a coffee on a Saturday afternoon feels like navigating a bumper car arena. And don't even get me started on the winter off-season, where the tourists vanish and you're left staring at giant, frozen novelty signs in the freezing North Atlantic wind. Picture this. It's a spectacular summer evening at sunset. The sky is a deep purple, the ocean waves are gently crashing against the docks, and the air smells like fresh, salty sea breeze. You step onto your porch for a moment of absolute, peaceful serenity, and then immediately hear a bachelor party screaming puns from passing tour boat. Remember St. Louis du Ha? S punctuation issues. At least their address doesn't make the bank tell a blush. Number 4. Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia. Shag Harbor is the kind of town where quiet lobster fishing and the most highly documented UFO crash in maritime history exist on the exact same block. Tucked away on the rugged Atlantic coast of southwestern Nova Scotia, practically neighbors with Yarmouth, this tiny village is home to a tiny population of roughly 500 people. On the surface, it's a calm, weather-beaten maritime community, but the reality is permanently haunted by something that dragged itself into the ocean depths. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with: a median home price sitting at an unbelievable 180,000 Canadian dollars. That's less than a down payment on a standard townhouse in Ottawa, and average rent sits at just 900 Canadian dollars. Your dollar goes remarkably far because the cost of living is 25% lower than the national average. Crime is practically non-existent out here. The job market is almost entirely dependent on the sea, but here's the kicker. In October 1967, a massive craft with flashing lights crashed directly into the harbor, witnessed by dozens of locals and RCMP officers, leaving behind only a thick, glowing yellow foam. But here's what nobody tells you. The military and Coast Guard officially classified the incident as a UFO after exhaustive underwater radar searches found absolutely nothing. If you move here, you aren't just getting cheap real estate. You're moving to an incredibly isolated outpost where nothing happens after 5 p.m. As one Reddito put it, the locals are incredibly warm, but if you sit at the diner long enough, every single old-timer has a bone-chilling story about the night the ocean started glowing. So, what's the real trade-off? You get beautiful, historic oceanfront living for pennies, but you also get a deep sense of total isolation. You'll save thousands on a house, but you might spend your nights staring out into the pitch-black water, wondering what is still sitting at the bottom of the bay. And don't even get me started on the weather extremes. The North Atlantic fog rolls in so thick and heavy that half the time you literally cannot see your own driveway, let alone an alien spacecraft. I swear, the damp, freezing wind feels like it cuts right through your jacket and settles directly into your bones. Imagine this. It's midnight, and a blinding, wet marine fog has completely swallowed the coast. The air smells intensely of salt and cold kelp, and the only sound is the rhythmic, eerie groan of a distant foghorn. You look out your window into the dark water, feel a sudden spike of primal dread, and realize there isn't another open business for 50 miles. Number 5. Churchill, Manitoba. Churchill is the kind of town where extreme sub-zero survival and 1,000-pound apex predators exist on the exact same block. Perched right on the brutal, frozen edge of Hudson Bay, practically neighbors with the Arctic Circle, this isolated settlement houses a shrinking population of 899 people. On the surface, it looks like a rugged tundra outpost for wildlife photographers, but the reality is a high-stakes, real-world horror movie where humans are lower on the food chain. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with: a median home price around 150,000 Canadian dollars. That sounds like a total steal, but traditional real estate is hard to buy because most of it is government-owned. Average rent is a steep 1,400 Canadian dollars, and the cost of living is a crushing 35% higher than the national average because every single head of lettuce has to be flown in or shipped via a single rail line. Crime context. Humans behave perfectly. The local criminals are all polar bears. Here's the kicker. It is a strict local safety law that you must leave your front door completely unlocked so a stranger running for their life has an escape route from a bear. But here's what nobody tells you. The town operates a literal polar bear prison, a massive, windowless holding facility for troublesome bears who refuse to leave the local bakery alone. Halloween trick-or-treating requires a full military-style deployment of armed conservation officers, flashing sirens, and helicopters just so kids don't become snacks. As one Reddito brutally put it, walking home from a bar means constantly looking over your shoulder because a 9-foot carnivore might be using your local bank's ATM alcove for shelter. So, what's the actual price of this northern bargain? You get cheap housing, but you also give up total peace of mind. You'll save money on a down payment, but you'll spend your life living in a perpetual state of hypervigilance. Okay, can we talk about pedestrian safety protocol for a sec? Why does a casual walk to get a coffee require tactical scanning of the horizon, like you're in a war zone? I swear, you can't even take out your trash without checking between the bins for white fur. And don't even get me started on the isolation. There are absolutely no road connecting this town to the rest of Canada. If you get into a fight with your neighbor, you're stuck looking at them at the only grocery store until the spring thaw. Be honest down in the comments right now. Would you have the guts to live in a town where a polar bear could be waiting by your trash can? Or are you staying safely on your couch? Comment bear mode or safe zone below. Drop a like if your hometown feels boring now, and let's keep going. Number 6. Flin Flon, Manitoba/Saskatchewan. Flin Flon is the kind of town where municipal zoning maps and an absolute existential identity crisis exist on the exact same block. Straddling the wild, rocky border between northern Manitoba and Saskatchewan, this mining hub supports a slightly declining population of around 5,600 residents. On the surface, it's a rugged, hard-working northern community surrounded by gorgeous lakes, but the reality is an administrative hallucination because the provincial border cuts directly through town. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with: a median home price sitting at a mind-blowing 145,000 Canadian dollars. That's cheaper than a slightly used pickup truck, and average rent drops to just 1,000 Canadian dollars. Your dollar does absolute backflips here because the cost of living is 20% below the national average. Crime context is pretty typical for an isolated industrial town, mostly rowdy weekend bars. Here's the kicker. 4 years. The Canadian government legally grew official medical marijuana inside a deep, decommissioned underground mine shaft right beneath the city streets. But here's what nobody tells you. Because the city lines defy geographic logic, moving down the street can completely warp your tax brackets, healthcare access, and car insurance rates. The entire town sits on a massive volcanic rock shield, making underground plumbing impossible in some areas, meaning your sewage has to travel through bizarre, heated above-ground pipes called utilidors. As one local posted on Reddit, our house crossed the border just enough that we had to get our mail from one province but register our vehicles in the other. Doing taxes requires a math degree. So, what's the real trade-off? You get dirt-cheap real estate and unparalleled lakeside nature, but you also inherit a dual government bureaucratic nightmare. You'll save thousands on a mortgage, but you'll spend your life dealing with two completely different sets of provincial laws. Okay, can we talk about the roads and infrastructure for a sec? When your town is built on pure volcanic bedrock, potholes aren't just holes, they are structural craters. I swear, driving to work feels like a low-budget moon landing simulation that will absolutely destroy your suspension. And don't even get me started on Flinty, the giant, deeply unsettling fiberglass statue of the fictional sci-fi explorer the town was named after, who stares into your soul every time you buy gas. Picture this. It's a chilly autumn evening at 6 p.m. The sun is setting over a stunning wilderness lake. The air smells like crisp pine needles and wood smoke, and you hear the quiet chatter of neighbors. You pace from your living room into your kitchen, realizing you just walked across a provincial border to grab a glass of water. Number 7. Rashawn Sands, Alberta. Rashawn Sands is the kind of town where luxury lakefront properties and absolute garbage-tier building materials exist on the exact same block. Tucked away on the sun-soaked southern shores of Buffalo Lake in central Alberta, this official summer village features a permanent population that hovers around just 86 year-round residents, though it explodes with thousands of vacationers when the weather warms up. On the surface, it looks like a peaceful, upscale prairie oasis for boaters and birdwatchers, but the real estate market hides a wild, eco-eccentric secret. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with: a median home price that sits at a hefty 390,000 Canadian dollars, reflecting its status as prime resort territory, while lakeside rentals can easily command 1,800 Canadian dollars a week during peak summer. The local economy relies entirely on seasonal tourism and property taxes. Crime context. It's practically non-existent, unless you count a rogue lawn dart or a loud pontoon boat party. Here's the kicker. The town bypassed traditional building codes to allow a designated upcycled pocket, featuring a multi-million-dollar neighborhood built entirely out of compressed plastic bottles and aluminum cans. But here's what nobody tells you. While living in a house made of trash sounds incredibly noble for the environment, the structural reality is an auditory trip. The walls are heavily insulated with thousands of empty pop cans, meaning that when the classic Alberta temperature swings hit, the entire house pops, clicks, and snaps like a giant bowl of Rice Krispies. As one local cabin owner shared on a real estate forum, the lake views are gorgeous, but when a July thunderstorm passes through, my walls sound like a crushing recycling truck. It keeps the guests awake. So, what's the actual trade-off? You get beautiful waterfront living and unmatched eco-friendly bragging rights, but you also inherit an architectural instrument. You'll drastically lower your carbon footprint, but you'll spend your summer nights listening to your living room expand and contract. Okay, can we talk about the local lake anomalies for a sec? Buffalo Lake is famous for occasionally hosting rare, freshwater jellyfish. I swear, you go into the water expecting a normal Canadian swim, and you end up dodging tiny, transparent blobs like you're exploring the deep Atlantic. And don't even get me started on the winter wind. When that lake freezes over, the wind chill will cut through your upcycled wall so fast it'll turn your morning coffee into an icicle before you can take a sip. Picture this. It's a gorgeous July afternoon at 2 p.m. The sun is blazing at 28 degrees Celsius. The water is a perfect crystal blue, and you're relaxing on your deck with a cold drink. You lean back against your cottage wall, knowing the insulation keeping you cool was literally rescued from a local community center's recycling bin. Number 8. Pickle Lake, Ontario. Pickle Lake is the kind of town where dirt-cheap mortgages and the literal end of civil infrastructure exist on the exact same block. Deeply buried in the brutal boreal wilderness of northwestern Ontario, this former gold mining outpost supports a permanent population of just 398 hard-headed residents. Officially branded as Ontario's last frontier, it holds a wild geographic title. This is the most northerly community in the entire province that you can actually drive to year-round on a paved highway. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with. A median home price floating at a shocking 85,000 Canadian dollars, while local rents hover around 850 Canadian dollars a month. On paper, it looks like a financial paradise for anyone trying to escape the GTA's housing crisis. The economy is driven entirely by cargo aviation, wilderness outfitting, and running supplies. Crime context: mostly property mischief and cabin break-ins by local black bears. Here's the kicker: the moment you drive past the town limits, the pavement completely vanishes. The only way forward is a massive network of seasonal ice roads carved over frozen lakes and muskeg swamps. But here's what nobody tells you. Buying a house here means becoming a logistical survivalist. Because you are at the absolute terminus of Highway 599, the town acts as a high-stakes shipping hub for 22 fly-in First Nations communities. When the winter transport trucks roll through, the local diner looks like a scene out of Ice Road Truckers. As one local forum user posted, "The houses are cheap, but if your furnace fails in January when it hits minus 40 degrees Celsius, you can't just call an emergency technician. You either know how to fix it yourself, or your pipes burst before the parts fly in." So, what's the actual trade-off? You get practically free real estate and a front-row seat to the Aurora Borealis, but you also inherit total geographic vulnerability. You'll eliminate your housing debt, but you'll spend your life living at the mercy of subarctic supply chains. Okay, can we talk about the name for a sec? Settlers literally named it Pickle Lake because the shape of the water looked like a cucumber. I swear, you move your entire life to the edge of the civilized world just to tell people your address sounds like a sandwich side dish. And don't even get me started on the summer bugs. The black flies up here are so aggressive and massive they could probably carry away a small dog if you leave them outside too long. Picture this. It's a pitch-black January midnight at 11 p.m. The temperature is a skin-numbing minus 35 degrees Celsius. The neon green northern lights are dancing across the sky, and you're listening to the distant rumble of a diesel semi-truck heading north onto a highway made of solid ice, knowing your house is the last warm stop for hundreds of kilometers. Number 9. Val Jalbert, Quebec. Val Jalbert is the kind of town where state-of-the-art 1920s luxury and absolute, hollow silence exist on the exact same block. Deep within Quebec's majestic Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, this former pulp mill powerhouse features a permanent population of exactly 0 residents. On the surface, it looks like a scenic park wrapped around the thundering Waiatuan Falls, but this is widely considered Canada's best-preserved ghost town, a highly advanced society that vanished almost overnight. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with: a median home price of absolutely nothing, because you can't buy here. Instead, you can actually pay around 300 Canadian dollars a night to sleep inside the meticulously restored, century-old workers' cottages. In the 1920s, this place was an economic paradise. The local mill paid double the going rate, and every company home featured residential electricity and indoor running water, unheard-of luxuries that wouldn't reach the rest of rural Quebec for another 25 years. Crime context: 0, unless you count the friendly historical reenactors or the literal ghosts rumored to walk the lanes. Here's the kicker: the entire town's economy was completely dependent on non-transformed mechanical wood pulp. But here's what nobody tells you. When the global markets shifted and the mill failed to upgrade its technology, the owners permanently pulled the plug on August 13, 1927. The financial evaporation was so brutal that by 1929, the company ordered every single home boarded up. Families who had lived in total luxury were forced to abandon their dream properties in a matter of months. Today, over 40 original structures, including a massive 2-story convent school, the general store, and rows of skeletal houses, sit entirely frozen in the year 1927. As one travel blogger poetically noted, Walking down Rue Saint-Georges after the daytime tourists leave feels like stepping into a post-apocalyptic simulation where humanity just forgot to pack up. So, what's the actual trade-off? You get to experience the pinnacle of early 20th century urban planning, but you also inherit an overwhelming sense of architectural heartbreak. You can admire the stunning 72-meter waterfall, but you'll spend your night wandering dark, unpaved streets lined with decaying porches that nature is slowly swallowing whole. Okay, can we talk about the sheer scale of the ruins for a sec? The main mill building looks less like a factory and more like a Gothic stone castle dropping directly into a canyon. I swear, standing in the old grinder room while the mist hits your face feels like you're exploring an ancient, industrial dungeon. And don't even get me started on the overnight stays. They literally hand you a high-powered flashlight at check-in because there are no streetlights. If you hear a floorboard creak in your cabin at 2 a.m., you just have to pray it's the wood expanding and not a phantom mill worker trying to clock in for his shift. Picture this. It's a completely silent October evening at 10 p.m. The massive waterfall is illuminated by floodlights, casting long, dancing shadows across the empty stone facade of the general store. You stand alone on a gravel road, looking at a row of dark, empty windows, realizing an entire community's future completely vanished right here in a single afternoon. Number 10, Stewart, British Columbia, and its ghost-like twin, Hyder, Alaska. This is the ultimate grand finale, because we aren't just looking at a weird town, we are looking at an international glitch where two completely different countries fuse together into one single, lawless neighborhood. Tucked into a dramatic, glacier-carved fjord on the BC-Alaska border, Stewart houses about 400 Canadians, while its direct neighbor, Hyder, has a shrinking population of just 48 Americans. On the surface, an international border splits them right down the middle, but the practical reality is a total geopolitical hallucination. Let's break it down. Here's what you're working with. A median home price in Stewart sitting at an unbelievably low 165,000 Canadian dollars, while average rent hovers around 950 Canadian dollars. On the Canadian side, it's cheap mountain living. On the Alaskan side, it's total survivalism. Crime context. Hyder has absolutely no local police force, no sheriff, and no judges. Here's the kicker. Because Hyder is completely cut off from the rest of Alaska by an impenetrable wall of mountains, it has surrendered its entire American identity to Canada. But here's what nobody tells you. If you buy a house on the Alaskan side, you are living in a geographic twilight zone. Even though it is legally the United States, everyone in Hyder operates on Canadian Pacific Time, uses British Columbia's 250 area code, sends their kids to Canadian schools, plugs into a Canadian power grid, and pays for groceries with Canadian dollars. The local businesses don't even accept American pennies. As one traveler on Reddit explained, you can drive across the international border from Canada into Alaska with zero checks. There isn't even an American border station. But when you want to drive back into Canada, you have to go through full international customs just to go home. So, what's the actual trade-off? You get ridiculously affordable real estate surrounded by towering, prehistoric glaciers, but you also inherit total structural dependency. You can choose which country's flag flies on your lawn, but your entire daily existence is governed by the laws and currency of the country next door. Okay, can we talk about the local nightlife for a sec? Hyder's main tradition is getting Hyderized at the local tavern, which involves drinking a shot of 151 proof grain alcohol. I swear, the liquid looks less like a beverage and more like industrial lighter fluid. If you successfully swallow it without coughing, they give you an official certificate making you an honorary local. And don't even get me started on the bears, because there's no municipal garbage pickup on the Alaska side. The local boardwalk is basically a high-stakes meeting room where humans and massive grizzly bears negotiate over salmon scraps. Picture this. It's a bright summer evening at 9 p.m. The sun is reflecting off the massive salmon glacier, lighting up the fjord in deep shades of gold and violet. You stand with 1 foot in Canada and 1 foot in the United States, holding a wallet full of Canadian colorful bills, realizing that the lines we draw on maps don't mean a single thing when the wilderness takes over. Hey, at least Val Jalbert's 1920s ghosts didn't require you to bring your passport just to visit the neighborhood bar. Looking at you, British Columbia. And that is our complete list of the 10 most anomalous, bizarre, and structurally baffling towns across Canada. From towns built out of actual soda cans to international borders slicing right through kitchen counters, the real estate market up north is way wilder than any textbook lets on. Hit that subscribe button right now if you want to uncover more bizarre geographic mysteries. Smash the like button to help beat the algorithm, and drop a comment below letting me know which of these 10 places you'd actually risk moving to. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.